Thanks for joining me, Dr. Noah Erickson from Innovative Family Wellness. And I thought on this April weekend, in honor of Autism Awareness Month, I would talk to you about the all-elusive speech. It seems that so many parents and children come to me with an issue of speech. Either a child never had it, and they're now maybe 2-3 years old, or perhaps they had it once and lost it. So I always tease and say this. In order to have speech, think of an old-time radio, right? You need your antennas up, so you need your ears to work, and thankfully many children have their ears checked and everything's okay. But then on the other end, just like on an old-time radio, you need a speaker. So you receive and you express, all right? So there's a couple different types. One is called expressive speech apraxia, where you can't express yourself. And the other one is receptive, where you really can't interpret, kind of take it all in, and then have a sensible thought that conveys itself into words. So many parents over 13 years in practice have come to me in search of this all-elusive speech. And today, I'm going to focus on one critical element, or vitamin you could say, and that's called B12. Why? Because many people go using types of B12 and have success stories with speech. And I'm going to tell you a few of those cases today. So you'll hear some cases of children who had speech and lost it and then regained it, and then of cases of children who never had it and we were able to achieve speech using this form of treatment called biomedical autism treatment. Basically this, it's getting inside the body, checking levels of vitamins, minerals, gut health, food allergies, amino acids, in other words, the components that make your brain in your body click and tick. All right, so here we go. There's types of B12. One is called methyl B12. You can take it many different ways, right? You can take it in a tablet, in a pill, in a patch. You can take it by injection. There's other types of B12 called adenosine B12 and another one called hydroxy. And they all do something different. And there's something too anymore, you see multivitamins, they're finally getting rid of something called cyanocobalamin. So that's certainly a quick check, by the way, to see if your vitamin is an old school vitamin. You'll still see cyanocobalamin. So what does this do? Inside the hardware in your body, there's something called the methylation cycle. And while so many people in this autism community in search of speech want to know the MTHFR gene, and I totally get that. We've been doing this for years now. The genetic testing with saliva, with blood, and then we can find out what type of folic acid you need, right? Folinic, 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, whatever it may be specific to your child's body for the best outcome. But there's other seemingly forgotten genes that I want to bring to your attention today. There's a gene called MTR and another one called MTRR. And their job is to recycle and remanufacture B12. Kind of keep this whole methylation cycle pumping so that we have activity up here in the brain. Where else is B12 made? The gut. So why in children do I run stool analysis? Do we run test for leaky gut? We can do this by a stool sample, we can do this by a urine test, and by a breath test, all of which are available at the office. And very important, I want to know your level of starting B12. So we give the script to have your blood tested. So when you come to the office, these tests are available. So I write you the actual prescription for your B12 level. On the back end though, there's something called methylmalonic acid, which is kind of like my stop check, so to speak, to have your B12 checked to make sure it's not going too high, causing some other problems. In addition to that, we check your folic acid level. And there's a host of other markers to check to make sure methylation is clicking and ticking. But for this topic, that works, okay? So now we have it. We're starting to look at the genes. We're looking at the blood levels of folate, B12. Why? Because these are the nutrients that help the brain and areas of the speech click and tick. Okay, so we've got that established. So we're making B12, let's assume in the gut. We have enough healthy gut bacteria, right? We've taken probiotics. We've perhaps consumed drinks like kefir. Maybe you're having kombucha. You're having enough type of fertile soil in your gut where you're pumping out adequate B12. Well, here's a question. Is it going to get in the cell? So with the genetics, we can look at the type of B12 that's most specific to your body. So if we come back inside the cell, the B12 now we're going to say is inside the cell. We know what type to use, and we can start to see that work. But downstream from the B12 gene, if you will, the one I'm calling MTR and MTHFR, there's something called BHMT. And if you're familiar with this thing called methylation in speech, in genetics, you'll know where I'm at. It's like the shortcut around. So think of like running home somewhere as a kid. Maybe you're running to your buddy's house and you know there's a shortcut you can take. Maybe you can sneak through somebody's backyard. Or I used to be a paper boy, and at the end of my route, I used to try to run through a backyard and hopefully the neighborhood dog wouldn't chase me and I'd get home a little sooner. So it's the shortcut. There's something important there that we often use for this gene. It's called TMG and DMG. Simply put, they donate something called methyl donors. So it's like you're low on a few bucks and you need to borrow something that helps you get sneaking around that shortcut to start pushing pathways forward to actually occur speech. And I've had patients use dimethylglycine and methyl B12 in speak. So there's a great example. Years ago, goes back about 9.5 years, we had a little boy, Craig, to come to see me. And he had the type of speech that was actually lost. So his parents had videos at his first birthday, mama, daddy, doggy, cat, the basics, but getting there. In other words, he was using some copying mechanisms, if you will, and echolalia. He had some ability to get some words out, okay? Appropriate for his age. Unfortunately, for no apparent reason, at about the 18-month mark, he lost speech. So by the 2.5-year mark, his parents come to see me. And unfortunately, Craig had lost all speech. He could sort of hum to songs. There were some tunes that he could pick up, and somewhat you might say guttural sounds, almost like from your gut, the visceral sounds. But anyhow, he wasn't able to speak. Mama was gone, daddy was gone, doggy, cat, they were all gone. So here's what I did. I ran the genetics test using blood, and it looked at these little snips or markers to tell me what type of B12 he needed. He had a gene snip called COMT and MTRR and MTR and MTHFR that when I put all that together, he needed methyl B12 in very high concentration. We back-end checked with the blood test, like I said, B12 in the blood, the serum, methylmalonic acid, and then some other markers too. So what we found out that his body was drastically low in vitamin B12. He had genetic predisposition to not making it, so we supplemented it. I did it a couple different ways. I had him do a transdermal patch on his body in various parts. I also had him take it liquid, and we gave him very specific type of probiotics, one called Bifidobactam and another one called Infantis. These type of probiotics, unique to his gut flora, to help make B12 again inside his body to go to his brain. So what we helped do is this. This began more attempts at speech. But then when something called an organic acid test came back, I found biomarkers there that showed he needed a little help making something called glutathione. Well, it's like this. It's kind of like taking the trash out. It's kind of like in old-time cars where you'd put rust-proofing on there. He didn't have enough protective agents around the precious cells in his brains. So whatever happened at 18 months, be it an environmental insult, a chemical toxicity, a medicine reaction, no one's really sure. But the point is, we got this kiddo better. Okay? So glutathione. But what we had to use is something called DMG, or dimethylglycine and trimethylglycine. Compounded supplements that we use based on genetic SNPs. Extremely unique here at the office is the compounding of supplements based on genetic SNPs, or what they call single nucleotide polymorphisms. So what's amazing, in about 2 months, this child starts counting to 10. As though you walked over and just flicked a switch. Like it was in there, right? Everything had been heard and learned at one point in life, and I'm sure this little kiddo was taking it all in, but he just had to get it out. And this was helping to get the junk out that accumulated in his brain and caused inflammation around the brain called neurological inflammation. Markers were drawn. Labs from companies like CRX proved cytokine markers and leukotriene markers and various markers that said something had inflamed his brain. All right? So be it the gut inflaming the brain, be it toxins inflaming the brain, we did a couple of things. The methyl B12 multi-form, multi-route. And what I mean by that, we use the methyl B12 in different routes. Through the skin, under the tongue, in the gut. That's what I mean. We also use TMG and DMG to kind of get these cycles pumping, get the gears turning basically. And on top of this, we looked deeper into his body by using the organic acid test and the genetics. That's just one case. Case number 2 of speech. Really interesting here. There's a form of B12 called adenosylcobalamin. Hey Stacy, good afternoon. Happy Easter weekend to you and family. Hope all is well. So we use a type of B12 called adenosyl B12. And this type of B12 is specific to working on areas in the brain for this child's case. This girl's name was Emily, and she was 5 years old. She actually had a condition where she didn't speak. She had speech therapy, in fact, at a nearby institution right here in Pittsburgh, where they did great work using her hands and trying to have motions with physical motion to extract or pull out speech, you might say. And it actually was rather effective. But we still weren't getting full sentences. So when the parents brought them to see me, we actually did some extreme genetic testing and found out that based on her gene SNPs, she had deficit in something called adenosylcobalamin. On top of that, in this condition, she had heavy metals. You might say, what the heck is that? How could a girl be at 5 years old rocking out to heavy metals, right? I'm talking about environmental toxicity, a huge link or factor in kiddos with speech apraxia, be it expressive or receptive. Again, remember, expressive, like the speaker on, receptive, antennas up. So what we had to do here is heavy metal testing. And before we could thoroughly use B12, and this is so important, we had to stabilize minerals. And what we had to do is stabilize minerals to kick out the toxicity. So we know that things like aluminum and lead and mercury, they're neurotoxins. They bind into the gears in the brain and kind of gum things up. So in her case, we stabilized the minerals because as we performed detox, what they call chelation, we didn't want to push anything the wrong way. So based on genetic testing and urine and hair sampling, we found out that aluminum was gumming up a pathway called BH4. BH4 is just a pathway, it's called tetrabiopterin. It's critical to the other side of MTHFR. So you'd happen to be looking at a genetic chart. I mentioned before with the other child, with Craig, MTR, MTRR, BHMT, glutathione. That's kind of pushing that side of the pathway, what some call the transsulfuration, anti-aging transsulfuration pathway. I'm now on the other side of it, if you will, looking at serotonin and dopamine. And everyone out there in pursuit of speech, this is critical. In her case, I tested her vitamin D levels. And on the organic acid test, we found markers of dopamine and norepinephrine, brain chemicals and adrenal markers that were not in balance. So important here. Vitamin D makes this pathway click and tick, okay? So based on genes, looking at how this worked, I found out that she needed adenosylcobalamin in a double form, both liquid and tablet for most optimal absorption, but the metal toxicity came here. So this all-elusive speech, if we have metals kind of gumming up this whole pathway, think of it this way. You're riding your bike, it's a beautiful spring day like it is here in April. And again, if you're just joining me, in honor of April, Autism Awareness Month, I want to give a big shout out and say Happy Easter, everybody. And also, in honor of April, Autism Awareness Month, I'm putting this on today. So looking here at speech, right? That all-elusive speech. Those who've gone through speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and unfortunately, you're asking, is there something else going on? So I'm talking here about heavy metals, not rock bands, but things in the environment and medicines, chemicals, products of personal hygiene, everyday cookware, drinking water, okay? So we're looking now at life, basically, how it is to be exposed and living here, where I live, actually, in Western Pennsylvania. We also have another practice out in the eastern part of Ohio. So it's a big problem here. In fact, in Pittsburgh, they've been talking about lead in the drinking water over the past month or so, and it's causing a big uproar because unfortunately, there's been too much lead in parts per million that has been found, and now there's a problem. So unfortunately, that's an issue, heavy metal toxicity. Hey, good afternoon, Heather. Happy Easter to you and family too. Thanks for tuning in. So at this junction in the pathway, dopamine and serotonin work together to help with speech. Vitamin D is critical. So let's all go outside and get some sun, right? Hey, good afternoon, Karen. Happy Easter. And vitamin D has to be mowed. So on this kiddo's genetics, at these junctions, speech was gumming up. So we had to do oral chelation. And before you run off and get scared, I want you to hang in there. For 8 years, I worked at a very large, nationally known integrative medicine clinic that did intravenous chelation and glutathione. I've been around this now for 13 years doing this. We use forms of oral EDTA in a really neat soak that we do that you can put in the bathtub. Anyone out there love your essential oils, maybe magnesium Epsom salts at night, and you put those in the bathtub as kind of ways to relax and calm your kid down? Well, it's the same thing. There's a transdermal or across the skin form of something called EDTA soak that I use quite frequently in the practice. So 3 nights a week, the parents put this in the tub, and her parents found that it really helped to detox metals. But we had them taking enzymes and also chelators orally to get the junk out. We also had to use some very specific RNAs. We now know that genetic testing affords us the ability to look at ribonucleic acid therapy. In other words, jump inside the cell, hijack those mechanics that went wrong, and start to give the raw genetic material to pump out the junk. So what happens? When you degum or open up this pathway for dopamine and clear up some serotonin pathways, that's a very critical link for speech. And how to know this was happening? It wasn't just guesswork. It wasn't muscle testing. It wasn't that I read some book last week and thought by week number 6 or week number 8 this should be happening. We do random urine testing. So here at Innovative Family Wellness, we capture heavy metal toxicity on urine testing and look at something called the creatinine level. It gives me an idea how well your body's detoxing. So what I did here, vitamin D supplementation, removal of heavy metals, right? Get the junk out, open up the gears, and this pathway started to open up. So in her case, the all-elusive speech expression actually came to life. And what's so rewarding is when we were into this plan 6 months, she was able to put together 6 to 7 word sentences, going from no words at all, basically going from guttural sounds. So again, if you're looking at speech and asking why, think to yourself, broad spectrum, yes, definitely engage in speech therapy. It's wonderful. As I mentioned before, many children go to physical, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and have great gains. But if you're asking yourself, is there a biological link? Absolutely. And if you're doubting this thing called heavy metals, it's alive and well. I can tell you after doing hair tests, stool test, urine test, if you don't think you have toxic metals in you, go ahead and try a test. And what we generally do in the beginning is a test basically saying like you're going to cut down a tree and look how many rings are on the tree to guess its age. That's called a hair test. A simple sample of your hair can see if you have heavy metals over a period of time, almost like rings on a tree. Once we start the active process of supporting genetic pathways, B12 pathways, and detoxification, you do urine test or stool test, and the metals come out at that time when we're purging these things. So this, again, is often an area where parents freak out or get nervous, and I understand. You maybe have heard a bad story of chelation, but the way we do this is by getting the junk out of the cell at the cell level using RNA therapy. We balance minerals and vitamins to stop the latching and leaching on, if you will, of toxic metals to receptors in the body, and then we use nutrients. So again, this whole process takes time. So if you're looking for a quick fix approach, if you've read something that you can go and run off and try some product or a thing, that's not what we're all about. We're really about getting to know the child, telling the story, right? I gave 2 cases today. One was a condition where a child had speech and for no apparent reason lost speech at 18 months. And we were able to look at this pathway and regain it using genetics, vitamin testing, mineral testing. In another child, we did something different where they never had it, and we had to look at a different pathway. And I tell everybody this, when you're trying to regain speech in a child, it's as unique as your fingerprint. So I've never used the same plan. So whether we use RNA therapy, B12 therapy, TMG, DMG, vitamin D, whatever it may be, that's why I have a whole host of tests. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. check us out again. You can go onto the website, innovativefamilywellness.com. That's innovativefamilywellness.com. And you can also check out the unique website dedicated to children called drnoahsark.com. That's my first name, so you'll see DRNOAHS and then ARC. So drnoahsark.com. Check that out too. All right, so check those websites out. Guys, we're always here for you. If you have tons of questions about speech and where to begin, that's what I do. We look at the gut, we look at food allergies, we look at lots of factors in genetics, minerals, and vitamins. So again, if this is a concern of yours, a loved one, a neighbor, a child, you're having problems, and even stuttering, I could tell you cases of taking kids off their food allergies and stuttering stopped. I treated a teenage boy in Ohio who was 13 and a half and had stuttering until we identified he had a gluten or a wheat allergy. We removed that, and that was it. The speech was fluid. Another clinical pearl before I go here, omega-3 fatty acids, right? It's brain food. Think of your grandmother pushing down cod liver oil down your throat years ago. That's another clinical pearl. So we do levels for oxidative stress, in other words, stress to your cells, to see if you know omega-3s or brain food. So keep in mind there's lots to consider, lots to do. Check us out. We're always there to help you. And this is Dr. Noah Erickson for Innovative Family Wellness, wishing you a very happy April and spring, and God bless everybody. Have a happy Easter. Take care.